Christy, look at this poor farmer. He looks so dirty. I can't associate myself with such men.
Why are you rude to me?
Because you're poor.
Is it a crime to be poor?
Yes, it is. Look at him. Pathetic.
Christy Daniels had never touched anything cheap in her life. Not her clothes, not her cars, not even the air she breathed. She grew up in a luxury penthouse on the 45th floor of a shining glass tower in Atlanta. Her father's name was printed on the sides of buildings and spoken with respect in boardrooms across the country. Anthony Daniels had built his empire from nothing. Logistics, real estate, technology, one business after another. Now, thousands of people worked under his name. He had more power than most men twice his age, and he used that power to give his daughter everything she could ever want. The problem was that Christy had slowly started believing that her world was the only world that mattered. It didn't happen overnight. It happened little by little, so quietly that nobody noticed. Like rust spreading across something expensive while everyone admires the shine. By the age of 24, Christy had developed one simple rule about people. If they couldn't afford a seat at her table, they weren't worth her time. One evening, Anthony called her into his study. Christy. He set down his pen and looked at her. We're going to Maldives this weekend. She barely looked up from her phone. Maldives? As in that town. Your cousin Bose is getting married. He folded his hands. It's family. Christy's face immediately tightened. Dad, you know I don't do small towns. There's nothing there. No decent hotel. No good restaurants. And half the time, there's no signal. Christy. Her father's voice became firmer. Just one level lower. That tone meant the discussion was over. Life isn't only what's inside this building. Christy sighed. Fine. She wasn't happy about it. But she went. The drive from Atlanta to Maldives took almost 4 hours. Christy sat in the back seat of a black Escalade with her two best friends, Jade and Ashley. As the city disappeared behind them, she watched through the tinted window. The tall skyscrapers slowly gave way to highways. The highways became narrow roads. Soon, pine trees and red clay stretched endlessly on both sides. The excitement faded after the first hour. Nobody had much to say. Then the vehicle turned off the main road and onto a gravel path. The scenery opened up. Wide fields stretched as far as the eye could see. Christy looked outside and saw exactly what she expected. Nothing impressive. Flat land. An old rusted water tower standing in the distance. A few aging pickup trucks parked along the roadside. Then she noticed him. A young man, maybe in his mid-20s, working alone in a field about 50 yards from the road. He wore a faded gray t-shirt. His jeans were stained dark with soil from the knees down. The afternoon sun was blazing, but he continued working as if he didn't feel the heat. He was carefully moving a hand irrigation line across long rows of dry crops. Christy leaned forward. Slow down. The driver eased his foot off the accelerator. She watched the young man for a few moments. He never looked up. Jade leaned closer to the window. So that's what they mean by farm fresh. The girls laughed. Ashley pressed her face against the glass. He's probably been out there all day. Doesn't he get tired? Christy tilted her head. Some people are just built for that kind of life, I guess. She said it casually, the way someone talks about people who were never meant for anything bigger. Then she spoke a little louder, just loud enough for him to hear. The young man didn't react. He didn't turn around. He didn't look up. He simply kept working. For some reason, that bothered Christy more than she expected. She was used to being noticed, used to people looking, used to people caring. But this stranger acted as if she didn't even exist. Drive. Her voice was sharp. The driver pressed the accelerator. As the Escalade moved forward, Christy glanced back one last time. The young man was still working under the blazing sun. Maldives on a wedding weekend was the loudest quiet place Christy had ever seen. String lights hung everywhere, glowing softly as the sun went down. Rows of folding chairs covered the lawn. A bluegrass band was tuning their instruments behind a large barn. People she had never met walked up and hugged her as if they had known her all their lives. It felt strange. Too friendly. Too different. By evening, the entire yard was packed with guests. Christy had changed into a beautiful white sundress, the kind that cost more than most people paid for rent in a month. She stood near the edge of the crowd with Jade and Ashley, holding a drink she wasn't even interested in. Her eyes wandered across the gathering, searching for something that could keep her entertained. Then she saw him, the same man from the field, the same man she had laughed at earlier. But now he looked completely different. He wore a simple white button-down shirt and dark jeans. No expensive watch. No flashy jewelry. Nothing that screamed wealth. Yet somehow, he stood out more than anyone else. He was leaning casually near a wooden fence, holding a cup of lemonade while talking to an older man. There was something about him. A quiet confidence. A calmness that made it seem as though he owned the air around him. Christy nudged Jade. That's him. Jade followed her gaze. The field guy. Yep. Jade looked him over and smirked. Well, he cleans up nicely. Ashley laughed. Maybe we should go say hello. A slow smile spread across Christy's face. It was the smile she wore whenever she was about to do something she knew she shouldn't. The three girls walked toward him. When they were only a few feet away, Christy stopped. She looked him up and down, deliberately. The kind of look meant to make someone uncomfortable. Hey, she said. Didn't I see you working in that field earlier? The young man turned toward her. His eyes met hers. Calm. Steady. Not nervous. Not impressed. Not even annoyed. Just calm. Christy continued. You came straight from work. She tilted her head slightly. You could have showered first. A small smile appeared on her face. I mean, it's a wedding. Jade and Ashley giggled behind her. The young man stared at her for a single second. Then he simply turned back to the older man and continued his conversation, as if she hadn't spoken, as if she wasn't standing there, as if she didn't matter. There was no anger in his response, no insult, no argument, no attempt to defend himself, nothing. He acted as though she wasn't important enough to interrupt his conversation. Christy's smile faded. She blinked. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. That had never happened before. People always reacted to her. People laughed at her jokes, answered her questions, tried to impress her. But this man? He didn't seem interested at all. Okay then, she muttered. Turning away, she forced a laugh. Weird people everywhere. The girls walked off. But something strange happened. His silence followed her. Throughout dinner, through the speeches, through the dancing. Even when she tried to focus on other things, she kept thinking about him. About the way he looked at her. Or, rather, the way he didn't. What she didn't know was that his name was Andrew Tate. And what nobody at that wedding bothered to tell her was who Andrew really was. Years earlier, Andrew had started his first company from a small 2-bedroom apartment in Raleigh. He was only 19. Most people his age were still trying to figure out their future. Andrew was already building his. By 22, he had investors across 3 different states. By 25, his infrastructure company had signed contracts with some of the biggest development firms in the Southeast. His business continued to grow. Charlotte, Nashville, Dallas. One office after another. One success after another. Today, more than 600 people worked for him. Andrew was wealthy. Very wealthy. But unlike most people with money, he never felt the need to prove it. Every summer, he still returned to Maldives. He still worked on the land his grandfather had left him. He still wore simple clothes. Still drove ordinary trucks. Still preferred quiet mornings over attention. He had never understood why some people carried their wealth on their backs for the world to see. The field wasn't a place he was trapped in. It wasn't a life he was trying to escape. The field was a choice. A reminder of where he came from. A reminder of who he was. And while Christy Daniels spent the rest of the night wondering why a farmer had ignored her, she had absolutely no idea that the man she looked down on was richer, more powerful, and far more successful than she could ever imagine. Christy spent the drive back to Atlanta laughing about the wedding. Small town energy, she said, shaking her head as she sat beside Jade in the back seat. Those people live in a completely different world. Jade laughed. So true. Christy looked out the window as the countryside disappeared behind them. As far as she was concerned, the wedding was over. The people were behind her. And the guy from the field? She would probably never see him again. She had no idea how wrong she was. Because in just a few days, her world and his were about to collide. 3 days later, Anthony Daniels called her into his office. Christy walked in and took a seat. Her father looked up from a stack of documents. There's a partnership meeting on Thursday. His voice was serious. A very important one. He slid a folder across the desk. If this deal goes through, it will double our infrastructure capacity across the Southeast. Christy's eyes widened. This was the kind of business opportunity she had been waiting for. Okay. Anthony leaned back in his chair. And I want you to represent the company. For a moment, Christy just stared at him. Me? You've been asking for more responsibility. He folded his hands. Now you have it. A rush of excitement filled her chest. Finally, a chance to prove herself. A chance to show her father she belonged in the business world. I'll be ready. Anthony nodded. Make me proud. Then his expression hardened slightly. And don't embarrass me. Thursday morning arrived. The meeting was being held in a downtown building that Christy had passed hundreds of times, but had never entered. 20 stories high, covered entirely in glass. Modern, elegant, powerful. The kind of building that announced success before anyone even stepped inside. When Christy arrived, she got out of her car and paused on the sidewalk. She adjusted her blazer, reviewed her talking points, took a deep breath. Then she saw him, standing near the entrance, arms crossed, looking down at his phone. The same man from the field. The same man from the wedding. For a second, Christy almost laughed. What were the chances? She walked toward him. Her heels clicked against the pavement. Wait. She stopped in front of him. Seriously? Andrew looked up from his phone. Those same calm eyes met hers. You again? Christy folded her arms. What are you doing here? He didn't answer. She smirked. Did you move to Atlanta? Still nothing. She continued. Looking for work? Then she pointed toward the building behind him. Because I should probably tell you. Her smile widened. This company is a little out of your league. A nearby security guard shifted awkwardly. He looked away. Andrew simply watched her. Calm. Silent. Completely unfazed. Christy laughed softly. Maybe try the south entrance. She nodded toward the side of the building. They're usually hiring for maintenance. The security guard suddenly became very interested in the floor. Andrew slipped his phone into his pocket. Then, without saying a single word, he walked past her, straight to the front doors. He pulled one open, and went inside. Christy frowned. For some reason, being ignored still bothered her. But she quickly shook it off and followed him. The meeting was scheduled on the 15th floor. When she arrived, several executives were already seated around a long conference table. The room was impressive. Large windows, polished wood, leather chairs. The kind of room where every decision involved millions of dollars. Christy took her seat. She was reviewing her notes when the door opened. The entire atmosphere changed. Nobody gasped. Nobody spoke. But every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The room suddenly became silent. It was the kind of silence that only happened when someone important entered. Someone powerful. Andrew Tate walked into the room, wearing the same dark jacket, the same simple clothes. 2 employees, wearing company lanyards, followed closely behind him. He didn't hesitate, didn't look around, didn't introduce himself. He simply walked to the head of the table, as if the seat had always belonged to him. Because it did. He sat down, opened a folder, then looked up. His eyes landed directly on Christy, and for the first time in her life, she felt her stomach drop. The floor beneath her suddenly felt unsteady. Let's get started. His voice was calm, professional, completely unaffected, as though she hadn't mocked him twice, as though nothing had happened. Christy could barely breathe. The man she had laughed at in a field, the man she had insulted at a wedding, the man she had told to apply for a maintenance job less than an hour ago, owned the company, owned the building, and was leading the meeting. For the next hour, Andrew discussed market projections, development strategies, partnership terms, and future expansion plans. Every number was precise. Every answer was confident. Every executive in the room listened carefully. Not because they had to. Because they respected him. Because he had earned it. Christy barely heard a word. Her mind replayed one sentence over and over. They're usually hiring for maintenance. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. When the meeting finally ended, people began leaving the room. Business cards were exchanged. Hands were shaken. Conversations filled the space. But Christy remained frozen in her seat. Eventually, she stood, walked toward the door, then stopped. Turning around, she headed toward Andrew's assistant. "Excuse me." The assistant looked up. "I need 5 minutes with Mr. Tate." The assistant checked a tablet. "I'm sorry. He's fully booked for the rest of the afternoon. I can schedule a meeting next. Please." The word came out much softer than Christy intended. The assistant studied her for a moment, then typed something. A few seconds later, she looked up. "He'll give you 2 minutes." Christy nodded. "Thank you." A few minutes later, she found herself standing outside Andrew's office on the top floor. Her heart was racing. The office door opened. She stepped inside. Andrew stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His back was turned. For a moment he simply stared out at the skyline. Then he slowly turned around. His expression didn't change. No anger. No satisfaction. No smug smile. Just calm. The same calm that somehow made her feel even worse. "You wanted to say something." Christy swallowed. Everything she had rehearsed in the elevator disappeared from her mind. She took a breath. "I was wrong." The words hung in the air. "About you." She forced herself to continue. "Both times. At the wedding. And outside this building." She looked directly at him, even though every part of her wanted to look away. "I said cruel things. Because I assumed I knew exactly who you were." She paused. "And I was completely wrong." Silence filled the room. Andrew studied her. Then he asked a simple question. "Why does it matter now?" The question hit harder than she expected. Because he was right. Why did it matter now? Christy lowered her eyes briefly, then looked back up. "Because I've never had to apologize for something I actually meant." Andrew said nothing. She continued. "Usually when I'm wrong, nobody tells me. Nobody pushes back." She laughed bitterly. "You didn't even react. Not at the wedding. Not outside. You didn't flinch." She shook her head. And that's when I realized. Her voice became quieter. "I'm the one with the problem." For the first time, something shifted in Andrew's eyes. Not much. Just enough. "I grew up with people judging me based on how I looked," he said. "They thought they knew everything about me before I spoke a single word." He walked back to his desk. "I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to perform wealth just to make strangers comfortable." He sat down, then folded his hands. "People like you used to bother me." Christy felt those words hit her chest. "Used to." Andrew nodded. "Used to." She looked down for a moment, then gathered her courage. "Then tell me something." He waited. "What would it take for you to see me differently?" She met his gaze. "Not for business. Not because of my father. For me." Andrew studied her carefully. Not the way most people looked at Christy. Not because she was beautiful. Not because of her family name. Not because of her money. He looked at her as if he was searching for something deeper. Something real. Finally, he spoke. You'd have to actually be different. Christie's heartbeat quickened. Andrew's expression remained calm. Not say it. He leaned back slightly. Be it. And for the first time in her life, Christy Daniels had absolutely no idea how to do that. Christy left Andrew's office without saying another word. She rode the elevator down in silence, walked through the lobby in silence, drove home in silence. No music, no phone calls, no replying to messages, nothing. When she arrived at her apartment building, she parked in the underground garage and sat there. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. 22 minutes later, she was still staring through the windshield, thinking. She thought about the field in Maldives. She thought about the wedding. She thought about the meeting. Most of all, she thought about Andrew, about the way he had looked right through every version of herself she had spent years creating. The polished version, the wealthy version, the impressive version, the untouchable version. And somehow, he hadn't been impressed by any of them. For the first time in her life, Christy started asking herself questions she had never asked before. She thought about the children she had grown up around. The ones who never had the opportunities she had. The ones whose parents couldn't buy their way around problems. The ones who had dreams but not the resources to chase them. She thought about what it would feel like to build something that actually mattered. Something bigger than herself. Something real. By the time she went to bed that night, she had already made a decision. Not a safe decision. Not a temporary one. The kind of decision that changes your life. The kind you can't easily walk away from. The next morning, she walked into her father's office. Anthony looked up from his desk. Morning. Christy sat down across from him. Dad, I want to start a foundation. Anthony raised an eyebrow. A foundation? Something real. She leaned forward. There are kids in places like Maldives who don't have access to good tutoring. No college counseling. No test preparation. No support. She paused. I want to build a program that's completely free. Fully funded. I want to give them opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. Anthony stared at his daughter. Not because the idea was impossible, but because it was unexpected. Very unexpected. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he asked quietly, Where is this coming from? Christy looked at him. Does it matter? Anthony thought about that. A small smile appeared on his face. No. He leaned back in his chair. No, I suppose it doesn't. Then he nodded. If you're serious, I'm with you. Christy's answer came immediately. I'm serious. And she was. 6 months later, the Daniels Access Initiative officially launched. It started in 4 counties across rural Georgia. Many people expected Christy to fund it and disappear. They were wrong. She ran it herself. Not from an office. Not from a boardroom. Not from behind a computer screen. She was there. Every week. Driving to Maldives on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Meeting families. Talking to students. Listening. Learning. Working. The old community center became the program's first home. It wasn't glamorous. In fact, Christy and 3 volunteers had spent 2 weekends painting the walls themselves. She didn't complain once. She helped carry furniture, set up tables, organize supplies. She worked with school counselors, recruited tutors, called everyone she knew to help secure laptops, learning materials, and college application support. Slowly, the project began to grow. And so did she. She stopped wearing clothes that made kids feel uncomfortable around her. She stopped mentally correcting everyone's grammar. She stopped measuring people by what they owned. She stopped keeping score. The people of Maldives noticed. At first, they didn't know what to think. This was the same Christy who had arrived months earlier looking perfect, distant, and quietly judgmental. Now she showed up every week, rain or shine, working beside everyone else. The change felt almost impossible to believe. But week after week, she kept coming back. Slowly, people began trusting her. Because trust doesn't happen all at once. It happens little by little. One action at a time. One promise kept after another. Then came a Wednesday in late October. A black SUV pulled up outside the community center. The engine shut off. The driver's door opened. Andrew Tate stepped out. He hadn't called ahead, hadn't scheduled a visit, hadn't warned anyone he was coming. For a moment, he stood outside looking at the hand-painted sign hanging above the entrance. Daniel's Access Initiative. Everyone gets a shot. His eyes stayed on the sign for several seconds. Then he walked inside. The room was full of life. Kids sat around folding tables. Papers were scattered everywhere. A whiteboard was covered with SAT vocabulary words. Questions bounced back and forth across the room. Laughter filled the air. Near the center of it all sat Christy. She was crouched beside a 15-year-old girl named Deja. Both of them were leaning over an essay. Christy pointed to a paragraph, said something. Deja burst out laughing. Christy laughed too. Then she looked up and froze. Andrew was standing in the doorway, watching. For a moment, neither of them moved. Christy didn't smile immediately. She simply looked at him, the way someone looks at a moment they never thought would actually happen. She quietly said something to Deja, then stood up and walked over. Hey. Andrew nodded. Hey. His eyes moved around the room, taking everything in. The students, the noise, the energy, the reality of it all. Then he looked back at her. This yours? Christy smiled softly. Ours. She glanced around the room. The communities. I just show up. Andrew nodded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. I heard about it from someone at the county office. His eyes drifted back toward the students. Thought I'd come see it for myself. Christy simply nodded. She didn't try to impress him, didn't explain, didn't defend herself, didn't ask him what he thought. She let him make up his own mind. Andrew watched Deja pick up her pencil and continue writing. Then he spoke. You know, when I first saw you in that field in Maldives, his voice was calm. You looked at me like I was something you'd stepped over. Christy lowered her eyes briefly. That's fair. Andrew nodded. I completely wrote you off. She accepted that too. Then his expression softened slightly. But then you walked into my office. Christy looked up. And you did something almost nobody in your position ever does. Andrew met her gaze. You admitted you were wrong. You knew you were wrong. And more importantly, you understood why. The room seemed quieter suddenly, even with all the noise around them. Most people in your world don't do that. His voice remained steady. They just create a new version of the same story. Christy didn't argue. Because he wasn't wrong. Andrew looked around the room one more time. At the students. At the volunteers. At the work being done. Then he looked back at her. What you've built here. He paused. I've seen a lot of things that looked like this. Most of them weren't real. His eyes stayed on hers. This is. The words were simple. But they meant more to Christy than any compliment she had ever received. Something settled inside her. Something that had been restless for months. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. A few weeks later, her phone rang. The name on the screen surprised her. Andrew Tate. She answered. Hello. His voice came through the speaker. Calm as always. Would you like to get coffee sometime? Christy blinked. Coffee. Yeah. A brief pause. Just coffee. No business. No meetings. No agenda. Just talk. For a moment, a smile slowly appeared on Christy's face. A genuine one. The kind she used much more often these days. And without hesitation, she answered. Yes. Neither of them knew it yet. But that simple cup of coffee was about to change everything. They met on a Saturday morning. The diner sat halfway between Atlanta and Maldives. It wasn't fancy. No expensive furniture. No glass walls. No luxury decorations. Just old linoleum floors, worn booths, and coffee that somehow never seemed to get cold. The kind of place where people came to talk. And that's exactly what they did. For 3 hours. Neither of them noticed the time passing. They talked about their fathers. About expectations. About pressure. about growing up in worlds that looked different on the outside, but felt surprisingly similar on the inside. Christy talked about what it was like to be given everything. The best schools, the best opportunities, the best connections, and still feel as though something important was missing. Andrew talked about building something from nothing, about taking risks, making mistakes, working until exhaustion, and the price people pay when they choose ambition. There was no pretending between them, no showing off, no competition, just honesty. At one point, Andrew told her a story. The first time my company became profitable, he said, I came straight back to the farm. Christy smiled. Really? He nodded. I spent an entire day working in the field before I told anyone. Why? Andrew looked out the diner window for a moment. Because I needed to remember. Remember what? What hard feels like. His answer was simple. If you're not careful, success can make you forget. He took a sip of coffee. You start confusing success with security. You start believing it'll last forever. I didn't want that. Christy sat quietly, listening. The way he spoke made her think. Then she told him something she had never told anyone. Not even Jade. Not even her father. The night after our meeting. Andrew looked at her. The one in your building? She nodded. I sat in my parking garage for 22 minutes. Andrew waited. She smiled softly. I couldn't move. I just sat there, thinking, remembering, questioning everything. Andrew didn't interrupt. Didn't try to fix the moment. Didn't rush her. He simply listened. Really listened. By the time they finally stood up to leave, the diner had become much quieter. The morning crowd was gone. The waitress was wiping tables. Sunlight streamed through the windows. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Then Andrew smiled. A real smile. The kind that didn't happen often. I'd like to do this again. Christy's smile appeared immediately. Yeah. She nodded. Me too. And they did. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Because real things rarely happen that way. They happen slowly. One conversation at a time. One cup of coffee at a time. 1 mile of highway at a time. By the following spring, Andrew's company officially became an infrastructure partner for the Daniels Access Initiative. Together, they expanded the program. 3 more counties joined. A scholarship program launched. A second community center entered renovation. More students. More opportunities. More lives changing. And somewhere between board meetings and community projects, between Saturday mornings and long drives, between Atlanta and Maldives, something else changed. Christy changed. She stopped being the girl from the 45th floor. Not all at once. Not in a single moment. She couldn't even say exactly when it happened. Only that one morning she looked in the mirror and recognized the person staring back at her. For the first time in a very long time, she saw someone who could admit when she was wrong. Someone who could apologize. Someone who could show up. Someone who understood that character mattered more than image. Someone who had learned a lesson the hard way, but also the right way. She learned that the most powerful person in a room isn't the one who makes everyone else feel small. It's the one who doesn't need to. As for Andrew, he never told anyone what happened outside that building on the day of the partnership meeting. He never told anyone about the comments she made. Never repeated her insults. Never used her worst moment against her. Not because he had forgotten. And not because it didn't matter. But because he understood something many people never do. Sometimes the worst version of a person isn't the final version. Sometimes people grow. Sometimes they change. Sometimes they become who they were meant to be all along. Most people never give others the chance to prove it. Andrew did. He had been willing to wait and see. And, in the end, Christy Daniels had been worth waiting for. The field in Maldives never changed. The crops still grew. The soil remained the same. The sun still rose over the rows every morning. But Christy had changed. And that made all the difference. Lessons to learn from this story is that Never judge people by appearances. The person you underestimate today may be more successful, capable, or influential than you realize. Character is not always visible on the surface. True wealth is not what you own, but who you are. Money, status, and luxury can impress people, but humility, kindness, and integrity earn genuine respect. Growth begins when we admit we are wrong. Christie's life changed the moment she stopped making excuses and took responsibility for her actions. Real maturity starts with self-awareness. Actions speak louder than apologies. Saying "I'm sorry" is important, but proving that you have changed is what truly matters. Andrew believed Christie because she backed her words with actions. Success should never make you look down on others. Every person has a story, struggles, and value. Treating people with respect costs nothing, but reveals everything about your character.